Hi, everybody. I'm Sam Laprade. So happy to be here tonight. I know many of you are just coming into the room with all of us. So thank you very much and welcome to the webinar series hosted, of course, by CBI. We love getting together with all of you every single first Monday, first Monday of the month. We always look forward to the great topics. We've talked about everything you can possibly imagine: money, fundraising. Today is all about leadership. So we've got some great guests for you today. So we're gonna see all of you roll in. One of my favorite things to do when we just get started is to ask where all of you are from. So feel free just to pop in the chat there. Tell me what areas of the beautiful country you're coming from. We've had everything from Charlottetown to Victoria and everything in between. So I'd love to see where everybody's coming from today. And today's going to be a really interesting discussion. We have three guests today. Dwaine Taylor is going to be joining us. Robb Barnes and Kristina Inrig. We'll give them proper welcomes in a minute. Stormy Toronto is represented today. I'm in beautiful Ottawa, of course, the territory of the Anishinaabe people, and would love to see where everybody else is coming in from today. Why don't we get right into it and do some introductions? Raining in Waterloo today, so thank you for that. Wow, all the way from New Delhi. This is wonderful. Thank you so much for joining us. From lots of people from Ottawa, of course, and Nelson, BC. Hello, BC. And sometimes snowy Ottawa. Robb Barnes, always with a great sense of humor. Hello, Robb. How are you?
Great. How are you doing, Sam?
There he is. Robb Barnes, of course, very well known in this community. Currently the climate program director at CAPE, and also has held many amazing positions, including the ED of Ecology Ottawa. Robb's work has focused on executive leadership, engagement organizing, climate-friendly cities, and data-driven communications, which is wonderful. Welcome, Robb. You brought a couple of friends with you. Dwaine Taylor's here. Hi, Dwaine.
Hey, Sam. How's it going?
It's wonderful to see you. Dwaine is the founder and ED of newpact, a collective of social impact strategists and facilitators that provide affordable and accessible consulting and training to charities, nonprofits, startups, small businesses. Dwaine has designed a variety of workshops and mentored dozens of emerging leaders and fundraised over $1 million for charity. That's fantastic. Holds a bachelor's degree in law and master's in philanthropy and nonprofit leadership, specializing in impact measurement and evaluation. We're going to get lots out of our time with Dwaine today. And certainly not last, my good friend, Kristina Inrig. Hi, Kristina.
Hi, Sam. Nice to see you.
Always a pleasure. Kristina, with over 20 years of experience in the sector, I want to times that by like 3, not your age, but just how much energy you've put in. We're going to go with 60 years of experience, not by age, though. Kristina is in the sector, president of the Sustainable Capacity Foundation and the founder of Sustainable Capacity Solutions and its 5 social enterprises. Today, we're going to be talking about all things leadership. But first, the wonderful Nick is going to join us and give us a presentation today all about our favorite CBI. Take it away, Nick.
Hello and welcome, everyone. My name is Nicholas Kuchme, and I am the Sustainable Development Engagement Intern at CBI. Now, I'm pretty excited to hear from our stellar set of speakers today, so let's get right into it. CBI is a nonprofit organization dedicated to providing training, coaching, and mentorship support to staff and volunteers in the environmental nonprofit sector in Canada. We are a member of the Sustainable Capacity Solutions collection of 5 nonprofits who are each committed to addressing the unique capacity building needs of these small ENGOs. Now, CBI's mission in particular is to provide equal opportunity and access to capacity building training for every small shop environmental environmental leader across Canada. This comes in the form of essential training and coaching for these leaders through expert courses and programs catered to various positions and responsibilities in the nonprofit sector. Now, we focus on 6 core areas to build capacity. With this in mind, the goal is to equip them with the skills needed to lead our organizations effectively and make a lasting impact. Now, CBI facilitates a lot of programs like these webinars, but that's not all we do. Our other programs include our intern training program, designed to support youth who are starting their careers in the environmental nonprofit sector. Our capacity building certificate program is a boot camp for executives and senior managers. However, it is coming to a close this year, but registration will be opening again in 2024. I also like to express my thanks and congratulations to the alumni of this program for this year. And finally, we're bringing seasoned leaders together with environmental nonprofits in the Ottawa area. You can learn more and sign up at capacitybuilding.ca or contact us if you're interested. We love to match someone with over 20 years of experience to a nonprofit who needs their passion. You'll join a board for a 1-year term at a local ENGO, get board training and resources, and facilitate a workshop at one of our programs, like this webinar. Now, to make sure you're getting the best of the best, we have a team of amazing lead trainers, and we're fortunate to have both Sam Laprade and Robb Barnes here with us today. We also have Barb King and Alex Keenan amongst these lead trainers, and you'll get a chance to see them again in the future or in the past if you decide to check out our YouTube channel for some of our past webinars. Now, I'd like to also thank our sponsors and funders, the Ottawa Community Foundation, the City of Ottawa, the Sustainable Capacity Foundation, and the Suncor Foundation. Without the support, none of these programs would be possible. Now, as a reminder, we encourage you to reach out to us with any questions or insights you might have, or if you're just interested in learning more. As I said before, we're looking for both people and organizations to participate in our new season leadership program. So contact us through email, phone, or through our website. Now, be sure to register for our next webinar too on December 4th. We'll be bringing in a guest to talk about mental health and self-care. In particular, we're going to be talking about compassion fatigue. Now, thank you all again for being here, and I will pass it back to you, Sam.
Thank you so much. Appreciate that, Nick. And we're going to get back to this great conversation today regarding leadership. And leadership's defined in so many different ways, and I'm anxious to sort of hear the different perspectives of our guests today. Of course, Kristina joining us today, Dwaine and Robb. And when we think about leadership, I really feel like the term has really changed over the last decade. That's just my perception of it. Kristina, what are your thoughts in terms of leadership and sort of how that's defined? I think leadership, certainly maybe even 2 decades ago, was very much the person at the head of an organization, and that was the leader. And we sort of look at leadership as the leadership of everybody on the team. Now that's kind of where I'm seeing the difference. How about you?
Yeah, for sure. I think that, leadership can be expressed in all different corners of an organization. And it's an opportunity to be able to build leadership and to build a team where everyone has a part and a role to play. So I do think there is a lot of change. I think in the past, we focused a lot on the question of leadership and the difference between leadership and management and various kind of ways of defining it. I think that we're broadening out our definition for sure.
Absolutely. And when it comes to leadership, we've really seen a real move towards, and it's welcomed to EDI, Dwaine. We've really seen people step up and really share how important it is that it's just not leading from the top, but it's being very much inclusive. Talk to me a little bit about some of your thoughts in that area.
Yeah, it's a great question, Sam. I think Kristina kind of mentioned it a little bit before when she mentioned, the fact that leadership has evolved a little bit. It's broader than just leading and managing, but a big component of leadership still is people, right? People is really the core, and what we're seeing really around the entire world is that our organizations are increasingly more diverse, whether that's diverse in race, ethnicity, ideas, cultures. Anything you can imagine, there is diversity within their people. So our approaches to leadership have to adapt to that as well. And that's really what the core of EDI, or equity, diversity, and inclusion is recognizing that diversity exists, that difference exists, and then leveraging that for the benefit of the people that you're working with, but also the benefit of the organization. And there's lots of research that shows, the more diverse and the more inclusive an organization is, the more effective it is at its work.
No, it's a great point. And Rob, you've led a couple of organizations. How has it even changed in your time? Do you think the term leadership?
Yeah, for me, Sam, reflecting on it as someone who has been an executive director and now works in a campaigning role, I think leadership, I think Kristina just mentioned it, it can come from all parts of the organization. And there's a way in which there's kind of an opportunity to lead up the chain, which is kind of a novel concept. But I remember reading about it, a few years back and thinking about, isn't that interesting? The idea that, folks throughout can lead through the way they communicate, through the way they present information to, the executive director for decisions. So there's a lot of opportunities there. I mean, the gist of that kind of leading up the chain piece is kind of thinking that ultimately the buck stops at yourself in terms of responsibility for a lot of the outcomes. If you're complaining about, if you're thinking in your head, oh, my manager made a terrible decision, you often have to ask yourself the question, like, did I present the manager with the right kind of materials and the right kind of information with which to make a sound decision? And so it's kind of taking more responsibility. And so there are opportunities to do that in all sorts of places. And I think a lot of benefits confer to organizations that have that aspect baked in, where they're giving agency to folks at different positions throughout.
Thank you so much for that, Rob. And when I think about climate change and the work that you've all been doing, and certainly learning over the last number of years about all the different initiatives, I think we all have to be leaders in the area of climate change. Kristina, when I think about all of the different initiatives, not only at the grassroots level, but then you think about organizations that are trying to move public policy. I think every one of us needs to sort of take some sort of leadership role in this area.
Well, I think for me, that's why I'm so passionate about small shop organizations across Canada, because I really feel like that's where you get, community leadership at its best, in terms of people caring about their neighborhood, caring about the climate crisis, wanting to know what they can do in their own context, and then finding ways to struggle through building projects and initiatives that are relevant in their communities, or at a national level with partners across the country. So I really feel like I see examples of leadership all the time across Canada from some of the amazing small shop organizations that I work with. And not to say that big organizations aren't amazing too. It's just that sometimes we only hear about those big organizations and what they're doing around climate. What we don't hear about are the unsung heroes who are representing all kinds of different communities and neighborhoods and cultures who are doing work to make changes. So I just wanted to reiterate the importance of that grassroots and small shop community.
100%. And that's what I love about being involved, even with all of you once a month. Dwaine, we have a lot of work to do. We have a lot of work to do. There's been a lot of work done. I keep hearing this phrase in my mind as I was preparing for today that, we can build a bigger table because we want everybody to have a seat at the table. It's about having a seat at the table and allowing voices at the table. Because it's one thing to invite people, but if you're not going to listen and take the time to get to know everybody, then it's just, that whole analogy of just checking boxes off in terms of EDI. We don't want to do that. So talk to me a little bit about making sure that we are inviting people to the table, but also giving them a voice.
Yeah, that's a really great question, Sam. I'm actually going to expand on your analogy a little bit and not just talk about the invitation. I often in my workshops that I've done with small shop organizations, and shout out to those organizations, those grassroots organizations that Kristina mentioned, they really are critical to the nonprofit and the social sector, and are true change makers, specifically when it comes to the climate crisis. But when I do workshops with folks, I often explain EDI, equity, diversity, inclusion as a dinner party, right?
Oh.
I always say when you're looking at equity, diversity, inclusion, equity is about access. So who has access to your dinner party, right? Before you can even invite them, you have to think about who can actually get there, right? Mm-hmm. If your dinner party is 500 kilometers away from the town, there's no transit infrastructure, there's no way for folks without a vehicle to get there, or with time or anything along those lines, or maybe it's at a time that's inconvenient for someone who has familial responsibilities, that's a barrier to even inviting someone to the table. So that's an equity barrier you have to address. And then once you've addressed that, then you can talk about the invitations. You've figured out your equity barriers. You've figured out what are some of the things that we need to structurally address so that we can have diversity at our dinner party or at our table. And you invite people. And that's great. You can have that diversity. But then to your point, Sam, what's the point of having that diversity if the folks there don't feel like they're welcome? So you have a dinner party, but maybe you're only serving, I don't know, you're serving pork chops and mashed potatoes. And you're vegans and you're vegetarians, people who are maybe Muslim or kosher or anything along those lines. Folks can't eat that, right? So suddenly you have all these people at the table, but none of them are having a great time. None of them feel like this is a dinner party for them. You came to a dinner party, but now you can't eat. It's the same thing as sitting at a board table and not having your voice heard. So when you're looking at equity, diversity, and inclusion, you have to look at all of those three components together. You can't do them in isolation. And that's one of the biggest challenges that organizations have is they tend to look at them in isolation. They say, hey, let's make things inclusive for the folks that are already here. But if the folks that are already there aren't very diverse, you're not inherently making the organization more inclusive. Or they say, hey, let's diversify the organization, but then they don't think about what that means when you bring in these different perspectives and opinions and ideas and lived experiences. How do you then adapt the organization's culture around that, ensuring that those folks have a voice and that it's heard? So what's one of the biggest challenges and one of the biggest things I often recommend to organizations is don't look at these things in isolation. Look at them as complementary to each other. That's why the acronym exists, EDI, for that very same purpose. And I think that's really the key to ensuring that we're not just checking the boxes. It's really easy to check the boxes if you're focusing on one and not all three.
Well, I learned a lot there. That's awesome. I love the way you describe that. Really, it's very helpful for me. And yeah, no, I think that's really interesting. Rob, let me ask you this, and Kristina sort of touched on it. It's one thing to be told, okay, today you're a supervisor and tomorrow you're a manager and you have all these extra responsibilities. And but I find it, certainly in my career, that I got the title. Very often I wouldn't get any training behind it, any guidance. The mentorship part of this is so key. And then we wonder why leaders fail. We wonder why managers have some sort of communications issues with the team that they're trying to lead. Often we lack sort of that training or that mentorship. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's an interesting point, Sam. And the fact that you said mentor, I think is really important. There are all these management schools that have popped up over the past few decades, right, in academic settings. And so there's an academic element to what constitutes management. That said, a lot of the stuff you can read every book, you can read the Harvard Business Review until you're blue in the face, but you won't understand it until you either try it or engage with folks. And hopefully, Sam, to your question, we're not just throwing people into the deep end. You're providing opportunities for mentorship, and I think that's why a lot of the spaces that Kristina sets up, where there's coaching, there's peer support, a lot of these ED networks that exist, sometimes informal, sometimes formal, they're tremendously helpful. And I don't know an executive director or anyone in a kind of managerial position who's lasted a very long time who hasn't engaged in a kind of network like that, because you can learn both by the experience of others who've been there before, but also you have a kind of a network, a sounding board. You can bounce ideas off of this group. So I do think mentorship is an incredibly important piece, even in a world in which we can, theoretically learn all this stuff at school.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, maybe I can build on that, Sam, because I think it can be lonely to lead sometimes, whether you're in that leadership title position or whether you're doing something different within your organization that hasn't been done before. In either context, it can feel hard to set out on your own and to lead independently. And so I think that's why having peer support or having folks from other sectors who have done similar things, who can share their successes and challenges, can be so beneficial to you as a leader, because it's really like, it is how we have solidarity in the work we do, is through that collaboration and connection to others. And I just don't think we can be as effective of leaders in whatever role we're in if we don't have that support and network.
Mm-hmm. And Kristina, I wanted to ask you about women leading? Because I certainly remember, and I'll use the radio analogy for a second. You know, back in the day, I would drive as a little girl back and forth, Deep River to Ottawa all the time. My mom would be listening to talk radio. Never once did I hear a woman doing talk radio. And now there's lots of women that do talk radio. Whether it be leading an organization or the chair of a board, we still have lots of work. As I was saying to Dwaine earlier, still lots of work to do in lots of different areas. When you introduce yourself as a leader, do you still sort of get any comments about it, or are those days over, or we still have work to do?
You know, what's funny is that the nonprofit and philanthropic sectors are full of incredibly strong, incredible women leaders. And so I actually don't know that there's a leadership deficit from a gender point of view in this sector. Potentially in the bigger, really super well paying, huge organizations. There's still, I believe, if I looked at some of the stats, it's still a very male dominated environment. But certainly in the work that I do with small shop organizations, sometimes it's hard to find a man in the room, to be honest. So it's great that I want to panel with two guys, but there are a lot of powerful, incredible women executive directors out there in the environmental sector. There's also some amazing male leaders too. I think one of the programs that we've been running at the Sustainable Capacity Foundation, where I now work, is called the BIPOC Fellowship. And this is about supporting BIPOC leaders in the environmental sector. And I think that's really where there's more of a deficit in terms of diversity. And we've struggled to kind of like build up the support and finances to help to support that initiative. So I do think that that there's a real need for us to turn our attention in terms of how to even level the playing field and to engage leaders from all walks of life in leadership positions.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that, Kristina. Do you want to build on that at all, Dwaine?
Yeah, I think Kristina shared some really fascinating insights. Kristina also did the Masters of Philanthropy program with me, and I can say I'm an example of an outlier in the nonprofit sector. I'm a male and I'm racialized, right? There's not very many folks who look like me who work in the nonprofit sector. And so that is really a huge gap. And I think one of the challenges that we have to look at when we think about the gaps that exist around diversity and leadership for the nonprofit sector, whether it's environmental charities and nonprofits, or whether it's just the sector as a whole, is, why do those gaps exist? Like, what are the structural barriers that are preventing those folks from being a part of that? And what you often see is intersections of sort of challenges and oppressions that people face, right? So if you actually look at the history of the corporate sector versus the nonprofit sector, and then you look at how these are composed now, you'll see that the nonprofit sector has this plethora of women that's are deeply represented in comparison to the for-profit sector, because women were excluded from the for-profit sector. So they ended up in these sort of social service-based type jobs, right? In these traditional charities and nonprofits that we see now, and that has a generational tilt. We see that happening over 30, 40, 50 years. And now we're at a point where women are very deeply represented in this sector. And then we now have to look at other aspects of identity. So when we look at folks who are racialized or new Canadians, and we ask ourselves, why are they not represented in the nonprofit sector? Like, what are the challenges that are in that sector that prevent them from accessing the same opportunities? And some of those challenges are things that we've heard before, the same challenges that women face from entering the for-profit sector. That their qualifications were questioned, that their experiences weren't validated, that they didn't have a Canadian lens to apply to the work. But when we look at things like the climate crisis, it's not unique to Canada. The climate crisis doesn't stop at a Canadian border, right? So the challenges that we face are large. They're exponential. They're much greater than this division of difference that we often see. And there's so much value that can come out of those relationships, and understanding how does the climate crisis affect someone who didn't grow up in Canada but understands how that climate crisis affected them in their home country before they immigrated here or moved here as a refugee or a recent immigrant or otherwise, right? That's a huge factor. We need to understand those nuances so we can build our programs and our initiatives more effectively. So that's, I think, a great example. And I think Kristina did a great job summarizing that. And I think that there's definitely some work to do. And that's part of the work that I do with organizations day in and day out right now.
Okay, that's fantastic. We're going to do a bit of a lightning round. We haven't done this before. This is going to be fun. Robb's like, oh no, she's starting with me. Don't worry, Robb. Don't worry. It's all good. Okay, so I'm going to ask you all the same question. So if you could only have one of the three things I'm going to mention, if you could only have more time or more money or more people power, what would you choose and why? Robb Barnes.
From an organizational perspective, I
the
feel
leader.
parsing here. As a leader. I think more people power, and I'll qualify that just by saying having the right people in the right roles. I mean, that your team is everything in the nonprofit world, as in many other worlds. I'm sure the private sector is very similar in that regard. And so, yeah, having those right people plugged in who are passionate about their work can win the day, even if you have an extremely small team.
Okay, fantastic. Kristina, over to you. More people power, more money, or more time?
I don't know, Sam, because the thing is, I feel like they're so interlinked. Like if you're talking about people power from the point of view of paid staff, you can't have that without the money, right? And I think that's one of the biggest gaps is we can't, pay people fairly even in the sector because there isn't enough money to support it. So I think their two are very linked. And then of course, time is our most precious resource. So I would always say I would love more time for all the things we do and for my staff and for my team. But of course, if I had a little bit more money, I could hire a few more people to help support my staff. So again, yeah. I think they're all interconnected. So I don't know that I can answer your question very effectively, except I'd like to say I'll take all three, please. And if we can try to also not like put the burden on ourselves as leaders to try to do everything. Like we're not always going to be able to get more time, more money, more people all the time. At some point we have to accept we can only do so much. And so what is it I can do in this moment with the time, the people, and the money that I do have? So from now till the end of December, as we finish out the year strong, like taking a look at what are the strengths and assets that I have within my organization and what could I accomplish over the next month and a half? Well, maybe it's 2 months because it's only the beginning of November, right?
Exactly.
But that's what I would like to frame it as.
I love it. And I feel like I want to give you all three. So there you go. Dwaine, no pressure, but over to you. More people power, more money, or more time?
That is incredibly hard to follow. Kristina, I see Robb, Kristina's a great negotiator. That is like the best answer you could have given is, they're all connected and how they all work. I'm going to give a different answer too, just because I need to match Kristina's energy. I would say more collaboration, more than people, time, or money. I think there's this perception that specifically in small shop organizations that there's not enough of any of these things, right? But the reality is that there are some nonprofits out there and charities out there that have a lot of money, more money than they know what to do with. Then there's a lot of organizations that have a lot of people, and there's a lot of organizations that have a lot of time. I think that if we worked better together, we could, as Kristina shared, leverage those resources in really creative ways. I think there's a way for us to leverage the people, the time, and the money that we have more effectively across the sector. And I think that comes with collaboration. We need to kind of break down some of those barriers to the gatekeeping that we have often in the sector of, but this is my neighborhood and my topic and my area. And I think that breaking down those barriers between organizations, but also within organizations can really drive some change. So I'm also going to take the sort of political response and say all three through collaboration, as opposed to picking just one.
There you go. There you go. That was fascinating. That was fun. I love doing the lightning rounds. Okay, so that was great. Robb, something that Kristina mentioned was something I was going to bring up today, and I think now is a good time. And really talking about, setting that expectation level with yourself, setting that expectation level with your board and your team. You are not going to be able to do it all. There's a lot of pressure. I talk a lot about, when I went to a board meeting once and I came back from it and I was so frustrated and I sort of put my binder on my desk and I was like, they don't have a clue what I do. I'm so stressed, and they're driving away going, I don't know what she does, So sometimes it's a communications issue. Sometimes it's just, expectations that maybe are not being met. And then frustrations kind of lie there within. What are your thoughts in terms of making sure that we're taking care of ourselves while we're trying to take care of everyone else?
Yeah, so all of my best ideas are grabbed from other people. And here, the first idea around leading from behind, that was from a former U.S. Marine named Leif Babin. This one, the response to this question, Sam, comes from someone I met who has about 25 years in the public service area in high-level management positions. And he said, if you don't control your calendar, you don't control your life. And so I take that with a tiny grain of salt, right? Like, there are important meetings that pop up. There's a level of spontaneity that you want to have there, but there's a level of control that I think we should try to exert over our work time. And then also a level of expectations that gets set when we, are amazingly quick at responding to that first email. Doesn't mean that the person's going to expect you to be just as quick responding to the next email and the email after that. So a lot of these things are context dependent. I work in my role at CAPE, I work with emergency room doctors who are somehow incredibly lightning fast at responding to emails, and that's amazing, and I'm glad that they exist and they're operating at a very high frequency, but not all of us do that. And so understanding the context and how you're setting expectations and trying to keep some level of order and control over how you divvy up your time, I think that's kind of one of the keys to avoiding burnout and avoiding fatigue.
Yeah, I like it a lot. Kristina, over to you. What are your thoughts on taking care of your mental health?
Well, I think the first thing, a little bit around what Rob is saying about controlling your calendar, is recognizing and acknowledging that you can only do so much. And so when you have a week ahead of you, thinking about, obviously, I'm a list person. So I like to say, here's the things I have to get done this week. And here's some things that would be nice to get done. And, here's things that I'm probably going to put on my list again for the next 5 weeks until I finally do it. Right. Mm-hmm. There's always going to be things like that come across. But I think acknowledging that there has to be those boundaries, I've got 4 kids at home. So to me, if I'm not managing my time well, tonight is one of the nights where I am going to work till 9 o'clock. I've got some meetings going on, but then there's several times this week where I'm going to be home and able to have dinner with the family. So I think we just need to find that way. And balance doesn't mean it's always in balance all the time. Sometimes there are seasons that are really crazy and busy, but you don't want your entire year, your entire life to always be in that stage. And I think for me to avoid burnout and to have, keep my mental health in check, I have to make sure that there is those waves and that there is that time, and figure out, the other thing I did, which was really helpful for me, when I was on my sailing sabbatical, which as a point, it was me taking time away to go sailing with our family for 10 months together. So that was an effort in getting away. But I wrote a joy journal where I talked about all the things that brought me joy, whether it was a bubble bath or going to the theater, spending a walk with a friend in the woods, figuring out all those moments that brought me joy, not people in general, but me specifically, and what I really love to do. And then finding ways in my life to do more of those things. And then also taking it a next step further and saying, what brings other people joy? What are the things that bring someone else joy? And how can I make more joy happen in the world? How can I make more joy happen for my family, for my kids, for my colleagues, whether it's a birthday card or some other way of encouraging it. So to me, it's more fun actually to give than to receive. So, being able to find ways to give that joy is another aspect to it. So that was a long answer, but that's sort of where I get my nourishment.
I love it. And there's been a few moments over the last number of years of working with you that you do stop and smell the roses, and I see you do that, and it inspires me to do the same. So don't stop. Don't stop. Dwaine, how do you do it? Take care of your own mental health.
So that's a loaded question, Sam, because I think there's what I would tell people to do, then there's what I actually do, right? So there's always that bit of a separation. Mm-hmm. I think what I would do is kind of combine a little bit of what's already been shared, which is you have to know what you need for yourself, but you also need to know what you need from others as well. And particularly in an organizational setting, that's super, super, super important. I think the challenge with the nonprofit sector, or even I would say the social impact space, I would go broader, because I would say not just nonprofits and charities, but folks who are working in grassroots organizations, folks who are working on topics like equity, diversity, inclusion, social justice, is that we work in these spaces because we care, right? We care about these topics. So it's really easy to blend your personal passion and personal care with this commitment to your work. And sometimes, and you'll hear this a lot from folks in the nonprofit sector, it feels like if they don't get the task done, that they're letting down the impact, or they're reducing the impact that they could have or could make or could change. And I think getting over that is really key. And I think Kristina did a really great job of talking about, you can only do so much. But the other piece is understanding what you need and what you need from others. So what you need is kind of what Kristina talked about. What are the things that you need for yourself? Is that you just need a cup of coffee for 15 minutes where no one bothers you, right? Or are you someone that needs to run in the mornings, right? And carving out that time using those tips that Rob talked about, the calendar, and controlling that for yourself, that's really important. The other piece is the piece that isn't spoken about very much or very often, is what you need from others and being comfortable communicating that to others. That's so important. Your managers, your directors, your colleagues, sometimes they don't know what you need, right? So they don't know how important that 15 minutes of that morning coffee is going to be for you, right? They don't know that you don't disturb Sam during this time because Sam needs this time, right? So being able to communicate that and say, like, I need you as a team to let me have this moment or this space or this time, because that helps you protect your time. That helps you control that calendar. And that's really, really critical. And the same applies if you apply that EDI lens even broader. Something I often talk about with folks who are those few racialized or diverse folks in their workforce is being open to talk about the fact that, hey, when there are things that are happening in the world that are like deeply impacting you because of your identity, being comfortable enough to be able to present that in a work environment is so critical. And being like, I can't think about work as clearly this week because of this. And you don't need people necessarily to understand your lived experience or understand the topic or specifically the trauma or the challenge that you're going through, but you do need them to understand, all right? And you do need to be able to communicate that to them just at a baseline level. And that can make a huge difference. So there's two sides to that coin. There's the organizational side, and that's really critical to leadership, being a leader who can receive that information and support your colleagues. And then there's a side of being someone who's comfortable enough to share that information and be honest with what you need in those moments.
Yeah, no,
and
absolutely.
Just to add to that, like I totally agree with what you're saying, Dwaine. And I think that, sometimes we have to communicate in more than one way as well, because not everybody is receiving the information in the same way, or it doesn't always work as effectively. And that's true in a work environment. It's also true in a personal environment. Like there are sometimes things with my husband where I think I've told him something, and I'm literally like making the assumption that we've gone through this and planned, and he's like, "You literally never told me this was ever happening," or whatever it is, right? And I'm sure that happens at work too. For those of you in the world who are here and work with me, there are times when I feel like I've gone down this path of saying like, yes, let's do this, we're doing this, and then realize I haven't necessarily communicated that in an effective way, or we haven't communicated together and to each other. So yeah, it's very interesting.
Yeah, very interesting for sure. No, that's really great. We have a couple of questions, which I'm so happy. We really encourage you as well to put your questions in the Q&A. I get to ask all these great questions, but sometimes, to be honest with you, the best questions come from you. So we've got a couple right now, which I'm very happy. We want to engage Dwaine, Robb, and Kristina on these. The first question comes from Ada. I think I've got the name correct. Have you noted any uniqueness in the leadership in small environmental organizations? Robb Barnes, I'll let you take that one first.
Interesting. Yeah, uniqueness. Good question, Aida. Trying to think about comparing it, right? I've been in the sector now for about 14 years. So, my memory of other places existing is dimmer by the day. I have worked as a management consultant. I have worked with the federal public service. I will say that, to Dwaine's point, right? People are in it because they care. And that's one thing that I do see often, and it does bleed into how people take care of themselves, right? I spent 8 years at a volunteer-driven organization where you're always working with volunteers, and there's this very strong demand internally in your own mind to say, like, look, these people are volunteering their time. I should extend my hours too accordingly. And then, of course, also, if you're engaging the public, and I get the sense Dwaine works with lots of organizations doing this as well, you tend to work odd hours because you're working when they're working. And so just in terms of the uniqueness, there's a level of passion and a level of kind of values-driven work that you don't see in many other spots. I'm sure there are other industries where it pops up, but I can say from my experience with the environmental sector, I've never met more people who care more about a variety of issues attached to the big overarching one of environmental preservation.
Mm-hmm. Any thoughts on that, Kristina, yourself?
Yeah, I mean, I think small shops, what's interesting about leaders is that when they start out, when you're building an organization, you do tend to need to have a bit of a like jack of all trades capacity to you. So meaning when you're running a big organization, you can have a person who's dedicated to comms or maybe fundraising or maybe the HR piece. But often when you're starting, it's you and a few other people, or maybe just you alone. So you end up having to wear a lot of different hats, and you have to be comfortable being able to move and navigate between those different roles. And so while I do think it's important to identify where are there things that you're doing within your capacity that you can help outsource, whether that's even just having someone who's on a contract basis helping you with a particular role, because you can't do it all at the end of the day. It's also this comfort level with knowing that you're kind of jumping around from different roles, which I see a lot in small shop executive directors. And just like Rob said, like some of the most passionate, amazing, incredible people I've ever met who could easily be running other massive organizations or working in government or working in corporate, and they're choosing to work in this sector and to bring their passion and enthusiasm there.
Wonderful. Any thoughts from you, Dwaine?
Great question. So my experience in working specifically with small shop environmental organizations is not as comprehensive as I'm sure Rob's and Kristina's. Something that does stand out to me though is what I've seen from specifically environmentally focused charities and leaders in those areas is the approach is seemingly more open to innovation, open to technological advances, different approaches of thinking about how we actually address the climate crisis. That's unique because oftentimes what we find with the charitable sector, especially some of those bigger ones that have been around for a while, is this sort of like, we're not here to solve the problem, we're here to alleviate the problem. And I think that what we're seeing with the folks working in the climate space is that their objective is to like solve the problem, right? They really want to like be like, yes, we have fixed this issue, we have addressed it, we are on the right path as a planet and as a people. Versus for a lot of organizations, they unfortunately it seems at times that some of them have lost that spark, right? They're just kind of like, well, every year, we do this campaign, we do this initiative, and we're just here to make sure things don't get worse. And I think that the motivation and that passion that Rob and Kristina talked about is probably because you can't really do that with the climate. You can't just be like, oh, we don't want things to get worse, right? Because like it's pretty bad as it is, right? We have to kind of address it at a more structural and foundational level. And I think that's where that innovation, that drive for innovation comes from. It isn't just the traditional bake sales and street campaigns. There's environmental charities looking at different technological advancements, right? How we do farming in different ways, combining technology and AI and all sorts of really interesting stuff. So I think that's really unique. And I think a lot of leaders in this space are quite unique for that.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thank you for that. And thank you for the question. We've got time for more questions. So we want to make sure that we get your question in here. So feel free to add it to the Q&A. Rachel has asked a great question as well. The question reads, I find disabled people are massively underrepresented in our field. Do you have any tips on where folks can start with ensuring the table is accessible for disabled people? Rob, your thoughts?
I don't have expertise there. I think it's a really interesting point, and it goes to Dwaine's point about the dinner party, right? Like that analogy is going to stick with me for a very long time because thinking about how those elements are integrated, everything from what does your job ad look like to what is your organizational culture to how office driven is it, how accessible is your building? I mean, yeah. So I'll defer to others because I don't have expertise in this area, but I'd just say that it's a really important question.
Thank you, Rob. Dwaine, do you want to answer first, and then we can go to Kristina?
Sure. Yeah, I'll do my best here. This is something that I've talked with a lot of organizations about. The folks that are the most underrepresented in the workforce, period, whether it's the nonprofit sector, for-profit sector, environmental charities, etc., are folks with disabilities. I think there's a lot of layers to that. I think one layer is stigma. There is still a prevalent stigma around folks with disabilities. There's a lot of folks who are still working through their own biases around the belief of, like, instead of seeing someone with a disability as a burden or a challenge, but seeing them actually for the assets that they can provide to the organization. That's something that a lot of leaders need to work through for themselves before they're even open to really addressing this problem at an organizational level. The other piece is, of course, what we talked about, that dinner party analogy, right? Is what are the barriers to access, right? Something that I work with a lot of organizations on is there's structural limitations. So, Rob mentioned, job descriptions. Something as simple as, is reading your job post accessible on your website, right? Or did you just kind of put a PDF document that someone who uses a screen reader might not be able to access, right? So something as simple as that, they might not be able to see your job because you've just posted on an inaccessible website, right? So if they can't see your job, they can apply to your job, right? So something as simple as that, that's an equity barrier, and that's going to limit the diversity that you have, right? The types of people who apply. So that's super, super, super critical. And then the next piece, which is really important, is if we want to bring in diverse audiences into our organizations, we have to make sure that we have the space for them and we have the environment for them where they can thrive as well. It's similar to what you were mentioning earlier, Sam. You can't just bring people to the table. If the table's not accessible, what's going to happen, right? They're not going to stay, right? It's not always about recruitment. It's often about retention. I'm putting on my recruitment hat. For those of you who know me a little bit, I also know that I work in recruitment at Carleton University. And yeah, you never just talk about recruitment. You also talk about retention. And that's really critical in the equity, diversity, and inclusion space. And accessibility is a huge part of that. There's a lot of folks with disabilities, physical or otherwise, who get jobs. But then as soon as they get jobs, they don't get, again, that mentorship, that training, clear instructions, clear guidance. The building isn't accessible. The tools they have don't actually work to meet the needs of their disability. And all of those things make it impossible for them to be successful at their role. So that's really, really critical. So when organizations are looking to advance things like this, they have to really look at it at every stage. They can't just say, let's invite people, because if they just invite them, they're not going to stay, or they might not even be able to get the invitation to begin with.
Yeah, excellent. Kristina, anything to add?
I don't know if I have anything to add. I mean, I care so much about this community too, and I think that physical and mental disabilities there is still a lot of stigma. Growing up, my dad had polio, and so he is a Paralympic athlete and very active in the disability community. He used to be the executive director of the Canadian Wheelchair Sports Association, worked at Carleton with the Reed Institute. So I've been around a lot of folks with disabilities my whole life, ever since I was born. And these are some of the most incredible, amazing, intelligent, articulate people I've ever known. Who also happen to have only one arm, or who are in a wheelchair, or who are, having other challenges they're facing. And sometimes they can be so underestimated. And so I just would encourage us all, just to really take a closer look at the people that you're interviewing and engaging with, and really give people a chance. We've had some people work with us who just brought such an incredible depth to a position, and who maybe would be very underestimated in other situations. So I just want to encourage us. That's a really great question, Rachel, and just to encourage us to think about.
Yeah, no, for sure.
So,
great question.
I'd love to jump in with one other thing that's maybe like a tangible thing that if you're an organizational leader, something you can look at is strength-based hiring. So that this is an approach that we talk about in the equity, diversity, and inclusion space, where yes, you have a job description where someone needs to do X, Y, and Z. They need to kind of check those boxes of the work that they're going to be doing day in and day out. But strength-based hiring is about leveraging the strengths of that particular employee to advance or benefit the work of the organization. So I've worked with folks, for example, who are on the autism spectrum, and I've worked with folks who are like incredibly good at numerical tasks. I suck at numerical tasks.
Me too.
So for me, it's really, really helpful to know that this person is really good at this. They really like it. And I understand the ways in which they can work. I can build the work around their strengths, right? That means that they can contribute exponentially to the organization, as opposed to someone who can do numerical tasks, but maybe that's not their expertise. right? They're more of a generalist. So thinking about that strength-based hiring is a really inclusive and powerful way to diversify folks who may have disabilities, but they can contribute really specific skill sets to your organization.
Excellent. Oh, I'm so glad you jumped in there. We have about 10 minutes left. Boy, did that go fast. Okay, so I want to, and I'm going to remind everybody, if you have a question, it is not too late. You can throw it in the Q&A. We'd love to take any questions that you have. Until I see something pop in there, I do want to ask, I love asking this question too, in terms of resources. Is there a website, a book, a video, anything, Rob, that you feel you want to share with everyone on the call today, as maybe suggesting that be a place that they go? Maybe you got something out of that particular resource. Is there anything that you can think of, Rob?
Well, there's a great website. It's capacitybuilding.ca. It's a little biased because...
Other than that one.
No, I mean, there are a few great, besides Capacity Building Institute and a lot of the networks, there are others in the space. Sustainability Network provides a number of webinars. I know Capacity Building Institute is, of course, one of many organizations that deliver a number of services in the sector. Yeah, but I think to a certain extent, my approach has always been to learn from experience, and then from the experience of others. So find those networks, find those mentor connections. I think a lot of that is kind of handed down. For whatever reason, I'm thinking of like Star Wars, like Yoda has to pass it on to Luke Skywalker. That's how a lot of knowledge transfer works, especially when we're talking about something as complex as leadership. It's not, one webinar won't solve your problems as much as this is a great one. It's one great book won't either. But those are the resources I would draw on, and they're often very locally specific and specific to the, to the perhaps subsection of the environmental sector or the social impact sector that you're working in.
Excellent. Thank you. Kristina, is there anywhere other than the Capacity Building Institute that you'd like to send us?
Well, just to be clear on this, the CBI resources that we offer are not just self-generated. Some of them are, but much of what we provide for folks is a collection from all kinds of different sources. So for those who have taken or might be interested in taking the Capacity Building Certificate program next year, you would find that a lot of the resources under, for example, organizational culture, there's tools and information there from a whole variety of great websites and resources. So, but Dwaine, you do a lot of this stuff. So I wonder if maybe you have a better answer than me.
I'm not sure I have a better answer. I think I don't want to mimic what Rob just did and kind of do a little self plug, but the work that I do is in this space, of course, right? Newpact really is a really interesting approach to sort of capacity building for organizations as well. So we're a network of social impact specialists, advisors, consultants. So everyone who works in Newpact is a professional in the space and has specific expertise. So if you're looking at how to advance HR for your organization and you're a social impact or charity or nonprofit, we have someone for that. Comms, we have someone for that. Myself, EDI, of course. So that's really, I think, obviously one avenue. And the model that we approach is making it cost accessible for those organizations. We're not trying to be the Deloittes or the KPMGs of the world, the high cost professional consultants. So that's one really interesting area. Something, though, that I think I always like to recommend for folks is building their capacity for empathetic leadership. And that's such a critical component of EDI and leadership and those intersections. And I think all of Simon Sinek's books are really good for that, because Simon Sinek just does a really good job at contextualizing what leadership is and then applying it to an organizational lens and motivating folks to want to take that action. So pretty much any book by Simon Sinek is always a great starting point to understanding leadership in a contextual analysis and applying an empathetic lens to that.
Absolutely. I just put his name in the chat there, just so people can grab it off there. We've got two more questions. I think we can get them both in. I'd be curious. This is from Jacqueline. Hi, Jacqueline. I'd be curious to hear about pivotal or formative moments in the panelists' leadership journeys. In 30 seconds or less, is there a moment that you can point to that was pivotal for you, Robb Barnes?
For me, it was being handed the keys to the green Rolls Royce that is Ecology Ottawa, in the sense that I had the executive director step away. He recommended me for the position. I had to, apply and everything. So it wasn't exactly like driving someone else's car, but I did move into that position. And again, learning by doing, taking on those leadership challenges. Originally, I didn't want it because I didn't think of myself as a leader, but forcing yourself in uncomfortable situations can lead to growth. So I'd recommend everyone to take that leap if they're ever presented with the opportunity.
I like it. Kristina.
Yeah, some of the more memorable moments have been when things have gone wrong and I've had to try to figure out what to do to navigate it. So, for example, when I was first hired at Tucker House, and they had made an error with their spreadsheet that they were doing and thought they'd lost $10,000. And so they let me go after only a few months. And I was like, wait a minute, this doesn't make sense. This money was there. Like, how could it be gone? So, knowing enough to dig into it and to try to find the solutions. And that made me very passionate about finances for nonprofits because it was a lesson learned through that. So I think sometimes when you get through some of the problems and mistakes, that you can be your best learning opportunity as a leader.
Wonderful. Dwaine.
Yeah, I think I want to go back to a callback to something that we were talking about earlier, which is learning from others. I think Rob really emphasized that. A pivotal moment for me was I was an Army cadet. For those of you who know the cadet program, one of the biggest youth program in Canada, also a charity and nonprofit. I was an Army cadet for many years, 12 to 19, did the whole program. And a pivotal moment for me was learning that there are different ways to lead. And the only way I learned that was actually learning from the first woman or female cadet regimental sergeant major. So if you know anything about cadets, it's the highest rank that you can be as a cadet. And her name was Delina Matthews, and she was the first woman to ever amount to that position for Blackdown Cadet Training Center, largest cadet training center in the country. And what was fascinating is, as with many things in military, you often learn that you lead through authority, right? You lead through like yelling and push-ups and marching and those sorts of things. And her approach to leadership was so different than anything I've ever seen, but she still commanded respect and commanded that level of engagement. And people wanted to respect her. She earned that, right? Which was really fascinating. And that really changed my approach to leadership altogether. I really started to understand that leadership isn't just one thing. It isn't just the way that we're taught in our textbooks or in those management schools that Rob mentioned earlier. This is how you manage, that you can learn leadership in different ways from different cultures, from different people, from different experiences, different genders, etc. So that was really pivotal for me. And since then, I've been leveraging that in all the leadership journeys that I've had and trying to learn from others.
That's wonderful. We have about 2 minutes. I really want to get to this question. So maybe just quick answers from everybody. What is required from the leadership in the environmental sector that could help taking the sector to the next level of social impact? Rob?
Well, that one keeps me up every night. I think back to Dwayne's comments around diversity, like, being able to maintain a diversity of perspectives will help you kind of run through an issue as complex as climate change. There's no other way to handle it. I mean, and so I think as a sector, we're learning, we're getting there, but there's, as you said, Sam, there's a lot of work to do. So I think incorporating that diversity into how we approach the issue, understanding that the general public won't be as deep as we are into some of these things, and understanding how to explain that to them and how to bring them along for the ride is our really big challenge, and will help us get to the next level.
Thank you. And Kristina?
I think it's the same answer, but maybe worded differently. Like, for me, we have to get beyond the same folks we've always been talking to for the last, 20 years who care about the environment. The environmental movement has to be a movement for everyone and accessible to everyone and see their place in it. So I really do think we have to broaden it out. And
last answer to you, Mr. Dwaine.
Honestly, I don't know if I can add much more because Rob and Kristina took the words right out of my mouth. Diversity really is the key. Diversity of your donor base, the people you engage, your leadership. We're dealing with an existential crisis, right? We're dealing with something that's much bigger than one person or one type of person. So that diversity is going to be critical to the success of the sector and this particular component of the sector. That and learning how to measure your impacts, which is something I'm also passionate about, but that's another story for another day.
Well, and maybe we'll make that another one for next year. You just never know. It has been a pleasure to spend time with all three of you. I've never seen an hour go by faster. Dwaine Taylor, Robb Barnes, Kristina, Inrig. Thank you so much for sharing on leadership today. I'm walking away with a lot. I know all of our participants are as well today. We had people from coast to coast to coast today. We are getting ready for December. Dare I even mention the word December? December the 4th is our next time together, and I cannot wait. I love this time with each and every one of you every single month. Thank you for your time. I'm Sam Laprade signing off. See you next month, everyone.